So I'm going to go ahead and give you the details on the Fort Pueblo Massacre, because this is an origin story that all of Pueblo can get something out of, because it's not clear cut and dry. Also happened in 1854, so I don't know whose lives this actually touches. So I'm going to give you the details, a little bit of the details, and then I got a major question. There's something I don't understand. And I even went to the museum, which is supposed it was built like Fort Pueblo, or it's on the same ground or something. I don't know. I had actually read that we don't know where Fort Pueblo was. It was north of the Arkansas River, and the Arkansas River was the international boundary between the United States and Mexico, and it was on the American side. So it was north of the Arkansas River, but the Arkansas River has dropped down half a mile from where it used to be at one time for, this reason or that reason. So yeah, what, you have to pay to get into the museum, so only the knowledge of history is just exclusively for the wealthy. The poor people can have access to history. I don't understand that bullshit. So the Fort Pueblo Massacre, this happens on Christmas Day, 1854, so Merry fucking Christmas, right? And the Fort Pueblo Massacre, now this, essentially it's the Indians versus the Mexicans, Native Mexicans versus the Native Americans. And why that's weird is because not 10, 20, 12 years before, I want to say 1852, you have all this history that's written about these white men that had established Fort Pueblo, but then they leave. They left in 1849, and then 1854, you have this horrible massacre with the Native Mexicans, and then the fort isn't used at all until the gold rush of 1859. California had their 49ers, and Colorado, Pikes Peak, had their 59ers. They found gold in Pikes Peak, the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, which is also stupidly named because the gold was 85 miles north of Pikes Peak. And Zebulon Pike is probably the first man to establish any kind of building here in Pueblo. And it was just a very crude building. He saw the mountain, and so he just felled 14 trees, and then those 14 trees was just the walls for his men to, I guess they would have to have covered themselves up with something else, but maybe something to hide behind if they were being shot at. But he's credited with the first structure here at Pueblo, first white male structure, because the Aztecs, I just read something actually about the Aztecs. Native Americans have been on this continent for 10 to 14,000 years. But it said that the Aztecs had built a sun temple near the Huajatola Peaks south of Pueblo, and they regard those mountains as the northern boundary of their empire. So the Aztecs never got to Pueblo, but they had a sun temple just south of us. That was their northernmost point. So the Fort Pueblo Massacre happens in 1854. Fort Pueblo Massacre, December 25th, 1854. It was a fort. It was also called El Pueblo. Pueblo means people, so the people or the village. So they had called that, apparently there was a village there of some sort, and then they had a Fort Pueblo that was established. The white people leave, and now all you have is Native Mexicans in this fort that is on the American side. And that goes to my question, which is, why are the Native Mexicans on the American side? Why are the Native Americans killing the Native Mexicans that was on the American side? I mean, this is such a fucking mess, right? This is a shit show. So on one side you got Native Mexicans who are living in a fort that was constructed by the Americans. So are they friendly? Were they pro-American Mexicans? Were they taking the fort back? Did they reoccupy the fort? And then the Native Indians, they were pissed off at the United States government for giving them smallpox blankets. And it killed their chief. It killed the Chico Velasquez. So Chico Velasquez had died, and he was a Muache chief, a Ute, which is the Utahs. The state of Utah is named after the Utes. And so Muache was a specific band of Utes, and then it says Jicarilla. I think it's Jicarilla. So the Jicarilla Dindies, the Apaches. Jicarilla. The Dindies are what Apaches call themselves Dindy. So why do we call them the Apaches? They call themselves the Dindies. I think we should start using their autonyms. Dindies is what the Apaches called themselves, and then their specific band was the Jicarilla, the Jicarilla. I like Jicarilla, to be honest with you, but if they're still existing today, you want to get it accurate. But the Muaches and the Jicarillas. So you got the Jicarillas and the Muaches, and there's about 100 of them on one side. Muaches, Jicarillas, and then you have on the other side the native Mexicans. And to just, find out who had got killed, you could just look at the names. So the Benito something, Sandoval. Benito Sandoval. So here's what happened, okay? So there was smallpox blankets that killed their chief. They wanted some retaliation. Chico Velasquez was killed, and so you have Tierra Blanco. Now, Chief Tierra Blanco, that means white earth. So this chief, white earth, and earth meaning like dirt, the tiara, right? The sort of the plains or the horizon. So white earth, and that's sort of ironic, right? So white earth, this earth is for the whites, but here is white earth, and is that Wyatt Earth? No, it's white earth. But the Tierra Blanco, he's the one that leads the attack. So Tierra Blanco, I believe he's a Muache, a Ute, and he organized his Muache Utes and the Jicarilla Dindies. So some of the Apaches came along with them. Some of the Jicarillas came with them. And they killed 15 men. All of the men were killed except for one who was shot in the mouth, and then he ran away. But all the soldiers, all the men inside the fort was killed. Most of them were native Mexicans. One was a Canadian, and he fought valiantly and then wound up getting killed the worst. Then they captured one woman and two boys. And then the one woman would get killed. Her name was Chipeta Miera. So Chipeta Miera was killed later on south of Pueblo at Salt Creek. So Chipeta Miera is one who's killed. And then you have the Sandoval, Benito Sandoval, Benito Baca, Benito Sandoval, Benito Baca, Manuel Trujeque, Trujeque, Manuel. And then you had just one name, Miera and Nasario. So those are Spanish names. So the question that I have is just, why are the native Mexicans in the American part of the country? Were they allies with the Americans? Did they retake it over? There was some sort of peace treaty with the Utes, the same year that the whites left. Where did the whites go? And then who is the one that actually established Pueblo to where it continued, until today? That would be a more important origin story. Somebody, organized a fort and then left it, and then the other inhabitants all got massacred, and then there was other inhabitants. I don't see how maybe they built the fort, so I guess, if they built the fort, that's something. But, yeah. Okay, so that's what happened, right? So now the story is fascinating. You got the two boys who are captured. You also had two women and one man who survived the joint military operation. The Muaches and the Jicarillas, 100 of them went into Fort Pueblo and then, killed all these people. Two boys were captured. They were eventually returned, and then two women and one man had survived the operation. So they killed most people. There were some survivors, and then some of the captured eventually, came out of it. So that would be the first-person narrative. If you could get the two boys' story, they were actually the son of the the chief, Benito Sandoval. So Benito Sandoval, he was actually friends with Tierra Blanco. The way Tierra Blanco had tricked the Benito Sandoval into coming in there, they were friends. They had been friends before. They had been trading with each other. And so Benito Sandoval didn't expect any of the hostility whatsoever. At first, they're doing a shooting contest. Tierra Blanco and Benito Sandoval is doing a shooting contest. While they're doing a shooting contest, some of the Muache start peppering, just kind of coming in and watching this thing. And then Benito Sandoval invites Tierra Blanco in for dinner and to eat and to feast and to get drunk. And while they were feasting, the Tierra Blanco and his Muaches and Jicarillas, they said, "Let's attack," and then they attacked. So they killed Chipeta Miera, the woman, by Salt Creek. They killed the Canadian away from the fort. 15 of the men were killed. Basically 14 of them were native Mexicans. One was a Canadian. And then Benito's two sons, Felix and Juan Isidro Sandoval, were captured by the Muache. So eventually they come back, and their stories are really exciting. Felix and Juan Isidro Sandoval. Juan Isidro Sandoval was traded to the Navajo and then bought by a Mexican speculator. Juan was restored to his mother 2 years after the Fort Pueblo massacre, after she paid the Mexican speculator $300 in cash and merchandise, including a Hawkins rifle. So Felix Sandoval was given up by the Muaches in Taos, New Mexico, to the Americans in 1855 after a peace treaty was signed. So 1 year later, Felix Sandoval is released by the Muaches, by the ones who had captured him, but they had sold Juan Isidro Sandoval off. They traded him to the Navajo, and then the Navajo sold him to a Mexican speculator. So the mother had to buy Juan Isidro Sandoval back from the Mexican speculator, and it cost his mother about $300. So good, news for the boys. Eventually, they are returned to their families. The man who survived, he got shot in the mouth, and it took his tongue. He had already known a lot of Native American Sign Language, so he was already familiar with it, which was, he'd been practicing for, speaking sign language since he had no tongue anymore. He had no tongue. The two women who had escaped Tierra Blanco's ambush, the Chief White Earth, the Muache chief, Andrea was a Mexican wife and Rosa was a Native American. They both hid in the brush in the river bottoms. So they, heard the shit or saw the shit, and they took off and they just hid in the brush in the river bottom. So, they hid away from the fort. Now, what does any of this actually mean? Since the government wasn't set up, since, all the founders or the so-called builders took off, there's a lot of information actually about the original white people that had constructed Fort Pueblo. I got a whole list actually of names here. You have George Simpson, which is huge. And then you got James Beckwourth, who started out as a slave, Robert Fisher, Matthew Kinkead, Alexander Barclay, Joseph B. Doyle, Teresita Sandoval, and Juana Maria Sandoval, who were the wives of George Simpson, and also another one of the... and George Simpson married Juana Maria when she was 14. He's like 30-something years old, and then she's 14. So this is the founder of Pueblo. I don't like that. He didn't establish Pueblo to exist as it is today. How much of the fort they actually built? They built it. They lived there for 10 years, and then they actually weren't even there for 10 years. They were there for 42 to 49, so 7 years. So they're there for 7 years, right? That's not nothing. But they were not the ones who established Pueblo to the first commissioner, the first mayor, the first constitution, the first charter, whoever the first charter would be, or I don't know, maybe the post office, whoever established the post office, but they would be the founders. So the Pueblo is right there on the border. It's an international border between America and Mexico at one point. And so because we're a border crossing, people going to the west, people looking for new lives, you got caravans. Pueblo is the leader, the manager is Iranian. They're calling for complete energy independence by 2035. So 2035, just in 15, 18 years, we're going to be completely energy independent. There's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of variety. I've seen Native Americans, I've seen Hispanic people, I've seen whites, I've seen black folks, I've seen all stripes of people here. And so I think that is one of the important things about Pueblo, is that there's just so many counter currents. And there was a group of Mormons I just read that came to Fort Pueblo. So the Mormons had crossed Pueblo going to Utah, where the Mormons are known to be, including some black Mormons. And so that's an interesting part to Fort Pueblo, that the Mormons were here. So you got Mormons, you got Native Americans, you got Muaches and the Utes and the Native Mexicans and white folks. So I think the story by itself is we can learn a lot about it. We can learn about the Muaches and the Jicarilla Dendes, the Apaches. We can learn about the Native Mexicans, and then sort of talk about the founding of Fort Pueblo. Where did Pueblo begin? Who were the main people who got Pueblo established the way it is today? Because this fort, everybody was killed in 1854, and then the white people who had established it were gone 5 years ago. So they're the founders of Pueblo. They built a building, and then they got the hell out of Dodge. And then the other inhabitants all got massacred. That's the founding of Pueblo? No, that's the beginning. It's a start. You're trying to found a town, a city, but you failed, right? Like, horribly. Now, the background to this massacre was the smallpox blankets. This was very much in the fall of 1854. There was this big meeting. David Meriwether, the governor of New Mexico, and I want to say he had some Kentucky ties too. Big plantation owner, right? Fucking plantation owner is there in charge of New Mexico. Kit Carson was there at this meeting in New Mexico on the Rio Chama in October 54. After this big Native American meeting, all the heads of the Muache, all the chiefs that got blankets, were dying of smallpox, including Chico Velasquez. And when Chico Velasquez died, that was their main chief. That was when, fuck these people. They pretend to be nice, they pretend to be decent, and they give us these damn blankets with fucking smallpox. That's biological warfare, which is an international war crime today. So that's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. So it's like chicken or the egg. Do you get mad at the Muaches and the Utes for massacring the inhabitants of Fort Pueblo if they were allied with David Meriwether and Kit Carson? Don't they have, the revenge, a legitimacy to their revenge? I think so. They have a legitimacy to their revengeful, murderous ways. So an eye for an eye. If they were, associated with the federal forces, then the massacre totally makes sense because they were getting killed by biological warfare. In fact, it's almost so you can make an argument that shooting somebody in the head is much more humane than giving them a disease where they slowly suffer and torture, just until they die. So they have live in an agony until eventually death rescues them. So smallpox would be worse. That'd be a worse way to kill somebody. Giving them a disease? Giving them smallpox? That's fucked up. And they go to this meeting, they believed that they were going to have a nice sort of conversation, and meanwhile they are all fucking dying. So they got the smallpox killed them, and then they came back and they had massacred everybody in Fort Pueblo. They killed somebody else too. They started out because the Jicarilla Dendes and the Muaches would fight side by side because historically they were friends. they had intermarriage, and just historically they always fought side by side. So when they had this Chico Velasquez got killed by smallpox, the Muache joined the Jicarilla Dindis in an attack on Costilla. And I don't know what Costilla even is. I don't know if that's a city or a county or another fort, but they had a joint attack on Costilla, and then they have an attack on Fort Pueblo. So the way I understand it is that this Costilla attack is more of the Jicarilla Dindis. So the Muache joined the Jicarilla Dindis in their attack, and then the Jicarilla Dindis joined the Muache on their attack on Fort Pueblo. So, yeah, Fort Pueblo. The legacy, I guess, that we do have, and the government wasn't established, the society wasn't established, no civil society, no government was established by any of these folks up until 1854, but the name stuck. So they called it El Pueblo. In fact, they called lots of the times the people in the villages, those are pueblos. I used to think Pueblo was the same thing, the adobes. I remember learning about adobes, mud houses that Native Americans had built, and I was thinking that's what Pueblos were, but Pueblo is the people. The people. So Pueblo should be for the people. What is it? I don't know the Spanish, but Pueblo should be for the people. Pueblo para es el pueblo. So Pueblo should be for the people. We are the people. We're named after the people. So Fort Pueblo, the legacy of Fort Pueblo at the very least is the name of this town stayed the same. But Fort Pueblo, because it was a village before the fort was there, so it had been called a Pueblo beforehand, and they actually called it other names. St. Charles, you had to cross the St. Charles River, so they would call it the St. Charles Town. St. Charles Town, the town at Pueblo, El Pueblo, Fort Pueblo. So anyways, that's pretty much everything I know about Fort Pueblo Massacre. So the last thing, the big question that I have, and if you know the answer to this, go ahead and write in the comments and let me and the rest of the world know. But essentially, what the hell were the Native Mexicans doing in Fort Pueblo? Why were the Native Mexicans there? Why did all the Native Mexicans get massacred by the Native Americans who were pissed off at the white man? They were pissed off at the white man, so they killed a bunch of Native Mexicans. Why did that happen? Why were the Native Mexicans in Fort Pueblo, north of the Arkansas River, which would have been American territory? So were they occupying? Were they resettling? Were they taking it back? Or were they friends with the white settlers, which would make sense why the Muaches and the Jicarillas would invade and attack the Native Mexicans, was because they were allies with the federal government, with the Americans. So since they were and allies with the federal government, so therefore they were their friends, they didn't mind. Or maybe it was just an opportunist thing. Maybe they were starving and they're hungry and they had enemies all around them, and here there's this damn fort and they have all the, plenty of water and plenty of food, and then, the Muache have to, I don't know. So I would like to know the exact reason for the attack, and also would like to know why most of the people that died were the Native Mexicans. So Indians versus Mexicans. So I don't know exactly, personally, I don't know how to feel about this. With the genocide of Native Americans, usually it's easy to put the oppressor label on the white folks. So, it's a totally different bag of wax, isn't it? It's a whole nother, like, Native Indians killed Native Mexicans. Mexicans used to be Indians. Their ancestry comes from Native Indians. So you have basically the same group of people, but you have Native Americans who were the wild, still untamed and uncivilized, running around and killing buffalo and being nomads, versus the Spanish who were trying to set up buildings and shops and farming and shit like that. So I don't know. I guess I'm sort of outraged by this. It's like, what the hell, Muache, Utes? What the hell are you doing? Why would you kill all these Mexicans? What did they ever do to you? And all massacres and violence are fucking ridiculous. So I don't know. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but there's no reason to do that. So unless there's evidence that the native Mexicans were allies with David Merriweather and Kit Carson, and they were the ones passing out the smallpox blankets, if you could link that to them. But maybe they were just pissed off and they saw a fort there and they said, let's go make some hay out of, let's go, they're sitting ducks. Let's go shoot fish in a barrel. And just to steal their shit for war provisions. And I don't know, if there's a war that's happening and there's a neutral party, I don't know. I guess I can't determine who's right and who's wrong in this incident. Murder is wrong, so it very much looks to me like the Muache and the Utes were in the wrong. But if they were under attack and then the native Mexicans were either neutral or they sided with one side over the other, well, then in a way you are guilty by association, right? So I'd like to know a little bit more about this. I've read the internet. The books aren't coming up. The images, Google is not allowing you to read the books anymore. They want you to buy the books. And from what I know, this is what I understand. So the Muache and the Jicarilla, the Muache Utes and the Jicarilla Dindi Apaches, 100 of them killed 15 native Mexicans. Or 14 native Mexicans, 1 Canadian. And 1 woman, a native Mexican woman. So, I guess I'll end it off with just their names. So, R.I.P. the lady, Chipeta Miera. R.I.P. Benito Sandoval. R.I.P. Benito Baca. R.I.P. Manuel Trujeque. R.I.P. Miera and R.I.P. Nasario. I'm glad Felix and Juan Isidro Sandoval survived. And Andrea and Rosa were able to hide and get away. Romaldo, I feel bad that Romaldo lost his tongue after being shot through the mouth. But he was able to get away and lived life. So, good job, Romaldo, at living. Romaldo is a good survivor. So, Fort Pueblo Massacre. Peace!